Okay, you're on.
Okay, welcome. Come in, everyone. Now, how might we best arrange this session? Are you okay back there, Liz? Yeah.
You might need to use the microphone if you want the recording to work. Hold on a minute.
Thank you. How does that sound? Excellent, thank you. Well, thank you for coming along this afternoon. I know it's a tricky spot and we're up against an interesting session with the AJET editors this afternoon, who we would have liked to have in our session, in fact. I'm Melinda Lewis. I'm a PhD candidate at COCO at the University of Sydney, and I've had a former existence as an academic director of e-learning at Sydney for the Health Cluster. My colleagues today are Dr. Karen Scott and double Dr. Patrina Caldwell, as we've just determined, a medical doctor and a PhD doctor. Together we've come to share with you something that we started talking about a few months ago, and we thought it might be something interesting to not only share our experiences about it, but in actual fact to bring it to this community and see if we could have an interactive symposium, hence our choice for symposium and not a presentation, and enable you to engage with some of the discourses that we've tried to engage with. So this afternoon we will be giving you a short presentation. Karen and Patrina have some stories that they'd like to share from their experiences. I'll be giving you a little bit more of some background. And then we've got a small group discussion activity with 3 key questions relating to the past, the present and the future, of course. So we would like to actually give you ample time to meet each other, chat and explore some of these questions. And then, of course, to have some sharing and feedback after that. Now, grab my clicker. Thank you. Thank you for coming in to this session. We've also got some handouts, and we'd like to, as I mentioned, I'd like to give a formal acknowledgement to Professor Peter Goodyear, who has been a good support in us shaping this and these ideas, and Dr. Mary Jane Mahoney, retired now from the University of Sydney, and her suggestion to actually bring this to the ASCILITE community and just open it up and see, as they say, what may unfold. We are, I need to declare this to you, we are audio recording this session this afternoon. Not only can we hear what we've been trying to say, but primarily to be able to capture some of the discourse that you might like to share with us. It's not a research project, it's not data for a research, my PhD, but I do need to declare that with you, that you're aware that we are recording and that we will be using, you can use these microphones, and I'll talk you through that when we get to that stage a little later. So if anybody is not comfortable with that, you of course have the option that we don't record at all. Everyone happy? Thank you. Of course, we would like to just listen to the transcripts, but we won't identify people and those usual sorts of courtesies. Okay. So what is this all about? We called it designer, writer and scholar. And how many of you may feel that that is your identity, or just a designer? Who is a designer? Yep, designer of learning. Yep, a writer? Yeah, a scholar? We're all in the business of scholarship. Absolutely. So we feel that there's been a lot of talk at the conference about collaboration and interprofessional or multidisciplinary type approaches around a lot to do with educational technology, and we've been really happy to hear that over the last couple of days. There also is a lot around the expectation of scholarship in higher education. So we think not only have we experienced certain writing challenges, different genres, different styles, moving within and between disciplines, we also think that bringing those together is an interesting, there are interesting relationships there that we often don't talk about. So we thought we'd like to open it up to explore those. We are going to speak from, I guess, our very Australian context, and we've come from the health disciplines or work within the health disciplines, so we will be speaking from that perspective. But of course, we're very open to what your perspectives and your contexts might be. So if we think of the characteristics of the field of what we're calling e-learning in higher education, as I mentioned, it's very collaborative. I don't think there's anything I've done in any capacity around anything to do with educational technology for many, many years that was not collaborative, with a range of partnerships, a range of different experts, and in very dynamic circumstances. Even Knoll and Oliver in 2007 in their book were talking about how extremely interdisciplinary this field is. And from the health disciplines, we talk about interprofessional practice a lot, but we're only starting to talk about the interdisciplinary nature of EdTech developments and research and scholarship. There are a range of pedagogies, educational designs, research paradigms and epistemologies. And again, we may change these as we move through our experiences, but we might also be working with people with very different sorts of pedagogical approaches or coming from very different research paradigms. And how do we have those discourses and those exchanges? So the three main constructs, in a sense, for us are e-learning, and just in a little bubble there, just a few of the key words about that. Very collaborative, and again, some of the key words. I've heard a lot more about partnerships. Of course, the inter, multi, cross, trans, however we want to describe those sorts of disciplinary mingling, I'm calling it now. And as I said, there's that expectation of scholarship. So whether it's scholarship, the scholarship of teaching and learning, or the scholarship of e-teaching and e-learning, different sorts of inquiries into educational technology, ed research, your disciplinary research, evaluation, and of course, learning analytics and its place in educational research, which is something Jason and I had a chat about at last year's ASCILITE. I think just going back in terms of collaborative, there was an interesting example in this room yesterday with the Virtual Worlds Working Group, who have up to 47 people co-authoring on most of their publications, which I thought was an enormous feat. So I'd be interested to have a chat there and how that works. Now, just lastly, before we move to Karen and Petrina and their stories, so putting those three together, and our key questions really are, what are the relationships here? What are your experiences? How do you kind of think about it or frame it or work with it or not with it? How do you make it work or otherwise in your context? And that's what we'd like to explore today. When we have lots of mingling, I like to turn to art, where we've got a great palette and lots of colours, and you know, your Venn diagram can become a very colourful, lots of circles and lots of bold colours and lots of things coming together, and that could be very rich and dynamic. And I think there's some ways that certainly Peter and Lena have talked about that, about having fluency and moving within and between disciplinary areas. Fluency with our thinking. Helen Swords talked about stylistic flexibility with our writing, conceptual elasticity with our thinking. But I think we've also got to be very careful that if you've done any artwork, if you put too many colours and keep working them, you end up with a lovely brown painting. I think we also need to be careful to find the right balance and not muddy the waters with a lot of our collaborations as well. So over to Petrina to tell us a story from an expert clinician who's done a lot of educational work in medicine.
Thanks, Melinda. How does this work? Thank you. I'm the Exhibit A, so I've just come as an example to illustrate the difficulties faced by people working interdisciplinary with other groups. So my background is I'm a clinician researcher with experience in publishing in biomedical science journals. So I'm a doctor, I'm a paediatrician. I do a lot of work with research with paediatric trials in children. I also do some research in medical education and e-learning and e-health. So in terms of research, lots of different interests and working with lots of different types of people, including some collaborators here from Macquarie University. And in terms of my publication experiences, apart from publishing myself my own research, I'm one of the editors for the Journal of Paediatrics and Child Health, which is a medical journal focusing on paediatrics. So with that in mind, I have published in science a lot. Just out of interest, how many of the people in this room would say that you've got a science background or you've published in science? And how many would be humanities? Yep. So have you ever tried working with someone from the other discipline and tried to publish? And so that argument of where should it be published is quite interesting. So we are continuing to do some medical education research, but there was one that really got the story rolling because I'm pretty stubborn and I don't like being beaten by a system. So I wrote a piece or co-authored a piece with a group of people which I thought would be really interesting for higher education teachers because it's about higher education. I didn't want to bury it in a medical journal because higher education teachers often don't have access to those journals to read what it's about. And so I attempted to write this and publish it in a medical education journal. And surprise, surprise, I encountered a lot of difficulties. So this was a journey. I presented the research at a health education conference, ANZIPE, which is full of health educationalists. I had really positive feedback. Lots of people came to talk to us about our work and said, you must publish this. This is so important, blah, blah. So I tried to write it in the best style I knew best. First submitted it to medical teacher, got a nice reject. They reject very nicely, right, compared to medical journals that reject, badly. Then I wrote to Higher Education Research and Development, got a nice reject. Then I wrote to Higher Education, got a nice reject. And by this stage, I'm reading a lot of books about how to write in the humanities, trying to understand what is it that's different in styles of writing, reading Helen Sword's stuff, and really trying to reinvent the way I write. And just really struggling, and finally in teaching in higher education, because I thought this is all about research in teaching in higher education. They've got to take it, got to reject. So in frustration, I just was not going to spend any more time. I've spent over a year in rewriting this 4 times. And so in frustration, I just submitted it to a medical journal, thinking it's really not their brief, but doctors supervise PhDs, so it's sort of fair enough, and just got accepted straight away. So that, I think, is a frustration that many people experience when they try and write for a different discipline to the one that they're familiar with, and hence, why we're interested in this topic. So what have I learnt out of this painful experience? I've learnt that as a scientist, for me, it was much easier to publish in a science journal. I have not yet published in a medical education journal. I think I'd like to do that. Look, there were journals I thought may accept me, but they were kind of low down, and I didn't want to stoop myself to that. That was the other point as well. That there were some unspoken writing conventions in the field of education that I didn't quite get. Despite all my reading, I don't think I really get it, but I'm getting it more and more as I speak to people, but I struggled with that. And for clinicians who are time poor, who have a piece of research they want to publish, we're much more likely to publish in a medical journal. I think very few people would have 4 goes before giving up. Most would have 1 go and then give up. But however, if your work is actually really important to teachers and educators, it's in the wrong place, and I think that's a real shame. And I think clinicians should be encouraged to publish in education research and education journals in my instance, but really for all of you in your field where your work might cross disciplines, I think it's really rich and helpful for us to be able to publish in other disciplines and to learn from each other. So that's basically my story. And I just think we do need to build bridges between disciplines through a multidisciplinary approach to research. I know this whole week has been about this sort of thing, so it's the how are we going to do it. Writing is accessible and beneficial to all, so how can we get the crux and nuts and bolts of what's really important and share that with people. I don't know about you, but when I sit in a room with people from different disciplines and talk about research, it's really exciting because we get ideas from each other and you go, oh, that's really good, and you sort of build from each other's ideas, and I love working in a cross-disciplinary way. But when it comes to writing, that's where I get stuck, because I think writing has a lot more conventions than ideas, and I think that's where it gets more difficult. Okay, I'll pass on to Karen.
All right, so I came from the opposite angle to Petrina. So my background is education, my undergraduate, and PhD is also education but focusing on e-learning. And I have a master's in writing for the media, for the web, film and print. But the last 6 years I've worked at the Children's Hospital at Westmead with Petrina. Before that, science and technology faculties at Sydney Uni with Danny. And before that, here at Macquarie in linguistics department and as a language teacher. So I've been moving around the disciplines as well, and recently had a lot of problems trying to get published, and found that with all of this movement across disciplines, I couldn't even publish very well in education because my style had become such a hybrid, a bit of a pidgin English, I think, really. So I've been trying to kind of clarify. I definitely muddied those waters, and I'm trying to clarify and find out what are the requirements for each disciplines. So that's been my journey, if you like, over the last 6 months. So that's what I'm going to look at in my little 5 minutes. So I've got a quote from Mary James, who's the president of the British Educational Research Association. And last year she wrote a call for arms in their journal, saying it's time for communities of educational researchers to have confidence to become outward-looking and strengthen alliances with other groups of researchers at home and abroad, across disciplines with different types of research institutions, which Kay was talking about yesterday and Gregor mentioned today in the keynote as well. So that's all well and good, but Lee and Stira remind us that, and I'm just going to read you this quote without the brackets, okay? Not going to read the bracket bit. So academic sense of membership of and allegiance to their discipline and disciplinary communities is a defining feature of their identity. And this is sort of what we're coming up against. But I think the root of that problem is actually what's in the brackets. These different disciplines and disciplinary communities have strong, stable and separate epistemological and methodological assemblages. Now I put that in brackets because I actually presented this, that's why it's a different colour, presented this to a group of doctors and scientists, and I knew that that bit in the brackets would cause them to, their eyes to glaze over, and I would lose them for the rest of the talk. Because that kind of language just doesn't sit well, the humanities language, in the sciences. But it's the most important part of that quote because it really does explain the problems between the different disciplines and the problems that I was having. So I'm just going to briefly look at those a little bit closely. So epistemology comes from the Greek word for knowledge. So it's the philosophy of knowledge, or how we come to know, and the methodology are the methods we use to try to understand our world better. Looking at that a bit more closely from the science perspective, really positivism is really the epistemology of the sciences, where the goal of knowledge is simply to describe the phenomena that we experience, what we can observe and measure. Knowledge of anything else beyond that is impossible. So it's very simple, it's black and white. In contrast, the social sciences have many epistemologies and research frameworks, and constructivism is a common one. We talked about it here at this conference. So an example quote, we each construct our view of the world based on our perceptions of it. Scientists are inherently biased by their cultural experiences, worldviews and so on. So our constructions must be imperfect. Because all measurement is fallible, the constructivist, or post-positivist, emphasises the importance of multiple measures and observations. So the theory and the methods are completely different to the sciences. And then what of the way this comes out in writing? So taking a quote from the 17th century by Robert Boyle, my expression should be rather clear and significant than curiously adorned in these discourses where our design is only to inform readers, not to delight or persuade them. Rather old, but still incredibly current. In contrast, in the humanities,
Papers in the humanities involve imagination, capturing the nuances of emotion as well as of logic, which often come through between the lines, more than through explicit arguments. The way that you use words and the rules of grammar define the style in which you craft your paper. So again, completely in contrast. The solution. So I've got a quote from Noel Entwistle, who I consider one of the elder statesmen of higher education, saying disciplinary specialists have been forced to collaborate in tackling real-life problems and so have begun to break down the boundaries. So this is what I think Kay was describing yesterday with the multidisciplinary groups, and I guess what we're investigating here. And finally, a quote from Henry Ford that Petrina found, coming together is a beginning, keeping together is progress, and working together is success. So I'm going to hand back to Melinda very briefly.
Thank you. Do people relate to what we've just tried to describe? Yeah.
Can I make a comment?
Sure.
Can you use the mic?
Oh, yes, sorry. If you press the red thing, it's recording for you, and only one at a time. Sure.
Can I make a comment?
Sure.
I particularly like the graphic of the constructivist with the woman doing carpentry, because the accompanying text was multiple measures must be taken. I've got a strong image of in Constructivism you measure several times. The cut's always going to be wrong.
That's lovely. Or the cut will be the same. Yeah, that's lovely. Thanks a lot for that. Now I'm just going, before we break into, I think we'll end up with 3 groups, and I'll give you a way of how we can manage that with the layout of this room. I just want to give you a sense of the enormity of the field of what we're talking about, educational technology and everything in and around that. And it's just from a couple of reviews. We haven't done an extensive review, but just a couple of other reviews that other people have done. So, and to me this really gives you the enormity of the field. And our question is, well, how are people managing this and where are they publishing, I guess, and managing these relationships? So for a start, Atkinson recently found that in higher ed and education journals, authors from geographical regions, predominantly the Asia-Pacific region, were found to be underrepresented. And again, my question then in green is it actually looking deeper than that? Is it about the number of submissions versus acceptances, or were there just not so many submissions in the first place? Another study for us looking at trends within our range of health science journals and health education type journals, because each discipline tends to have its own ed focus and ed journal as well. There was an increase in science of learning papers across those journals, and that was a study review done by Norman, again, quite recently. So is that a trend of Petrina's story of going as a fallback position back to her disciplinary med-ed people, but talking a lot more about sort of learning and teaching and technology? Is that coming in, or is it more of, you know, the psych, sort of real cog-psych, neuroscience stuff as into sort of, you know, whatever you define learning of science or science of learning to be? And what is that coming back in, and then how is that being disseminated? There's another, Benson presented actually at ASCILITE with a colleague in 2008 and found, they did a study around what constituted evidence within the research papers, and that there were a range of forms, so, which is, I don't debate, I think there are of course an enormous range of forms of evidence. But again, the debate about what is evidence was coming to the fore, is my point there. And in that same study, they also determined which was the most predominant data collection method, and at that point it was survey methodology, which again I think is interesting. A little while ago now, but interesting. Just the last slide, a few other key points, particularly the Herzer group, and quite a few people are Herzer and ASCILITE. Anybody a Herzer member here? Herzer is the Higher Education Research and Development Society of Australasia, and there'd been an increased trend certainly from 2007 to 2012 of 26 main themes with emphasis on ed tech that had appeared in their at their conferences. The theme of ed tech has been a predominant conference theme since 2009. Back onto AGET and ASCILITE, of course, they have 26 main themes, and the ones in blue are the most predominant themes there across those years. And across all in Australia, the Carrick ALTC, now OLT grants, looking at those submissions, educational technology has been embedded in a predominant number and is one of the 18 main overarching research themes across all grants submitted around learning, teaching and higher education. Across journals with different special editions, different call-outs for book chapters, conversational pieces, etc. Of course, contemporary perspectives and diversity is encouraged. But again, we like all of that, but we have to think, how do we do it? So, any questions on that so far? Just setting the scene. What we'd like to do now is to just form, we think 3 groups, maybe 4, and you can use the layout of people can sit, you know, if you're sitting in a row without mics, you can turn to the people perhaps behind you with mics. If we go into 3 groups, one of us can go into a group with each of you, and we've got 3 key questions that we can hand out to you and give you about 15 minutes to work through 3 key questions, and then come back, and we might invite each group to report on either the past, the present or the future from their questions on their page. So can we have an assemblage of seating and arrangements for 3 groups? And you do get a page each as well. So we sort of have to go forwards and backwards in terms of your grouping and your arrangement, and then when we have a bit of sharing, the use of the microphone. What's that, 33 minutes? Give them one each, they might scribble. I don't think I need that now. Yeah, and I'll keep timing. So you've got about 15 minutes. That's right. Sorry,
You do whatever. If you get them involved, I'm there. But I don't know that they...
yeah, I thought that was probably... I've done that actually. Okay, I've just heard that artists need scientists and scientists need artists. So I think that's a nice segue to invite you to wrap up your conversations. That was another 2 minutes. And if we can just, in the time that we've got remaining, we'd just like to be able to have a bit of between-group sharing and I guess a bit of a sense back to us about what you might have had a chat about. And then just to invite you and let you know that out of this and our impressions from today, we'd be looking to be drafting a letter to a journal or some sort of point of debate or something, and we actually invite you to collaborate with us if you're interested. So it's an open invite for some co-authoring, and we'll give you some contact details and references here as well. So we'd like this to be quite open and collaborative. So how would we like to approach this in the 10 minutes that we've got? Would each group like to raise perhaps the thing that struck out for them or the most predominant piece of discourse that they had? And then I'll invite each group to perhaps build on that in 10 minutes. So what's your name?
John.
John, would you like to offer something back for us?
Press the button.
Oh, and yes, if you can, and if the red light comes on, that's all good. Thank you.
Well, all three questions kind of collapsed into, came together in one form, I think. What we started with looking at a couple of things. There was clearly a couple of paradigms. I think what triggered that might have been moving sciences. So you've got to look at these as a go to Australia, UK and Europe, I think they don't make that distinction so cut and dry. You can mix up and pursue questions without having to necessarily stay within one of those paradigms. And in terms of what people were doing in our group, it seemed like often how the people choose a journal would be a negotiated choice depending on who they're collaborating with. So if it was a disciplinary journal, then that would be agreed upon, or if it was an education one. However, what people were encountering, and I think at least half of them, maybe more, was discipline academics saying, well, we've got to focus on our FOR codes, and we've been told we have to concentrate on particular types of research and topics and so on. So that informs the choices of journal publication. Yeah, so that's that has obviously implications for present and future of the education published, short-term future or longer-term.
Okay, thanks, John. That's some really real accounts, I think, that you've offered, and obviously it was fairly common amongst your group. Does any of that resonate with the other groups in terms of the issues that John just raised? Would you like to build on or contradict or some of those points? Oh yes, you turn that one off and that one on. That's it.
And just saying actually about the working within the group and the challenges of people seeing their working in one way and I guess one point you raised is when you try and write in a new discipline, if you don't change your vocab and the way you construct sentences and cohesively put the thing together, you cannot work. So if one of the links is to actually be open to new ways of writing and be not open to working with others and working with one another. One of the solutions we thought was that we practice is that we choose several papers out of a piece of work, so each one we focus, and then we were just talking about we draw out a paper that was relevant to a discipline, not write it. Finding people, so that's, we're sort of talking more about how you work together to get something happening that's meaningful and successful.
Great strategies and solutions, and I think very sensible to maximise across a range of outlets and platforms.
Yes.
Anything else from your group that you'd like to, any other issues? Yeah, so lots of issues around depth and breadth and sort of your own internal, your disposition and what you'd like to be doing, your own, as well as, FOR codes and pragmatic stuff about, all sorts of metrics and indicators and things like that. So, real insider-outsider kind of conflicts that I think we experience often. Fantastic. Would you like to share something from your happy chat?
I'm reading from Latrobe in Melbourne, and our group, I think, is a little bit different. We got quite engrossed by the possibilities, and we're probably going to talk more about the future aspect. But starting with that other quote that Danny gave us was that scientists need artists and artists need scientists. We very much spoke about the proliferation of paradigms, and people's experience here were across multiple paradigms and an incredibly rich diversity of experience that ranges across not only the written word but the visual genre in terms of the moving image and the multimodal aspects as well as the still image. And so we were very much talking much more creatively about what we need to do in order to break down some of those barriers and have frictions and tensions and possibilities emerge. So we were much more about trying to be radical and very much write and work on the edges, and that we also saw it as an academics and researchers, especially budding PhD students and thesis writing people, to break those boundaries, those traditional reified boundaries of traditional academic, conventional, the canons of traditional academia, if you like. And I think with the emerging multimedia that we have and so on, I think it's even more imperative perhaps that we do that. So we were more on the radical side. We also questioned, so we spoke about the multiple genre and the possibilities of multimodal journals, things like Educational Insight at the University of British Columbia that used to exist, and I'm sure there are a range of others, and perhaps that's one way forward. And we also spoke about the need to gradually attack the reified listing and rankings of these conventional journals, and we spoke about, we were thinking about some of the journal articles that we review ourselves, and the articles we read, and how they're entrenched in academies, and how many of us really enjoy reading them necessarily. I mean, if there's something that's a little well,